It's officially 12 midday. Good day. Welcome, Gerald. We've got Gerald O'Sullivan and Ronnie D. Koch. Rodney is going to be assisting or co-presenting with myself, and we are going to be having conversation with Gerald on the journey to cloud. Let's hear and let's learn from this professional in the ICT space. He's been in the ICT space for many years, and he's going to say it himself, not us. We don't want to undersell him. Rodney, please continue. Rod? Gerald, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Great to actually have you on the show. It's a great pleasure. I know this is the first. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You're cutting badly.
Good afternoon. Are we there? Am I? All right. Good afternoon. Let me try that again. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. We're glad to have Gerald O'Sullivan as our guest speaker today. We're going to share with us some intricacies around our journey to cloud.
Can we skip the portion while he's trying to sort out connection?
No, this is a discussion that actually happens all the time in most corporations. So we're going to try and
Rodney, you cutting. I think, Gerald, can we continue? Please, maybe let's do the introduction, what Rodney was going to say, and continue. He's going to find us on the way.
We're going to try and look at all of the intricacies in regards to advice on cloud.
It's not working. His connection is not working. Rodney?
Shall I continue, Sonwabo?
Continue, please, sir.
Great. Thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to chat to you and to your listeners. I think what Rodney was trying to say was, the journey to cloud is not an easy journey. And my own background is that of a software developer. So I've got a lot of experience in understanding how the complexities of developing applications and putting them live can bedevil, an organization, either help or hinder. And I've also played the role of a CIO in several different organizations. I've also had firsthand experience of being in a position of having to govern IT infrastructure. And the one thing that really struck me was how challenging the governance issues are when you are working with infrastructure which is elastic, which is scalable, where people with the right access controls can just fire up virtual machines and fire up databases without worrying about procurement processes and adhering to standards. So my company, Octon, what we do is we are trying to work in a space where software development intersects with cloud infrastructure and cloud infrastructure service provisioning. So the one area I wanted to concentrate on in this hour that we have is to talk about the role of containers. What are containers and what role they play in the journey to cloud? So I'll just take us a little bit back to say, what is a container? How do we conceptualize a container? Now, the metaphor to bear in mind is that the container, think of the containers on a ship. They're all they're standardized. They have similar security features. They're of a certain standard size. The truck driver or the ship's captain doesn't care what's inside the container. They only care about moving the container around. Mm-hmm. Well, container technology in the infrastructure world is very similar on cloud infrastructure in the sense that your container contains the application and just enough of the sub-modules and dependencies to be able to run that container. This makes it very easy to move containers around in the same way as moving a container from ship to port onto a truck. Onto a truck is easier because it's containerized. So it is
okay. No, sorry. He says Rodney says he's going to try and join again. He's got a problem.
Okay.
My apologies.
Yeah. So more, as I was saying, to date, the driving force behind this move to containers is about the move to cloud. Everyone's seeing the value of being able to provision dynamically and scale up and scale down easily. And to date, the units of abstraction was that of the virtual machine. The virtual machine abstracted away the hardware layer, so you didn't have to worry about hardware infrastructure. You don't have to worry about the security of your data center. You don't have to worry about fire hazards. That is taken care of for you in the virtual machine world. Now, what containers do, they lift the units of abstraction up one layer to that of the application itself. So now what containers do, they abstract away the virtual machine layer. Now you don't have to worry about your servers, whether they're virtual or physical. You just look at your entire data center infrastructure fabric in a unified way. So that for me is so containers, by conceptualizing your software at the level of the application, it lends itself towards managing software as a service easily, as well as making sure that you have the portability on-prem to off-prem, onto cloud and back. You want to repatriate your workloads.
Okay.
I see Rodney's still having challenges that side. Yeah.
For someone who is a novice in the space, running a company who's got everything on site. Right now, he's got servers, he's got server administrators, all other resources to support the server, the server environment. If that person decides to go cloud, is he or she in a position to get to reuse, or those resources become redundant?
No, it's okay, guys. Carry on. I can hear you. Just carry on.
Great. Yes, yeah. I think so, well, but very much depends on what workload you want to shift to cloud and why you want to shift it to cloud. Moving your infrastructure, your application infrastructure into the cloud is not necessarily cheaper. It's not necessarily going to save you money because, there would be retraining costs, there will be running costs and operating costs. And often if you've already sunken the investment in a data center, you might not want to, relinquish that investment. You might be sweating your hardware assets, for example. So you might not want to move those workloads. But in terms of your server administrators, your database administrators, software developers, that skill is relevant, whether it's on-premise or on cloud.
Okay. And when it comes to security, what are the security implications of going into virtual machines? How secure are those? How secure is that environment?
Yeah, I think the thing to bear in mind is that the cloud service providers all have a security model they call the shared responsibility model, where they have service level agreements with you to, for example, secure the physical security, to make sure that the servers are locked and under lock and key, that the firewalls are up, that the proxy servers are protecting you from denial of service attacks. But the key thing is that you are still responsible for the actual VMs, the virtual machine security yourself. So you would do that by encrypting your storage and by encrypting the links in and out of your application tier. So the service providers make it clear that they will, and they do have very, very high security standards because, for example, they have to adhere to national legislation, the HIPAA Act in the States, for example, or the same relevant security standards that the fintech world internationally needs to adhere to. So from a physical perspective, they are just as, in fact, probably more secure than most standard data centers would be, because they have to meet these international standards. But the responsibility is always your responsibility. The ultimate responsibility.
Yeah. No, thank you, Gerald. Why would you deploy, or why would an individual deploy an application in a container rather than in a VM? And I think if you can try and break it down to a language that is not a jargon.
Yes,
What's the difference? What's the real difference between a VM and a container? Lots of people right now are still talking about cloud. We're talking about a container, and we're talking about virtual machine. Virtual machine is associated with cloud. So if a person is a non-techie, is a person who's got an interest in securing his data or his environment for business continuity, to ensure that tomorrow is still another day. And if something happens like it happened in Durban last time, he can just move sites and start operating. What is the difference before you can get into the deployment of applications in containers?
Yes, sure. Okay, a container, I'll try and be as jargon-free as I can be. The way to picture a container, it's actually a slice of the virtual machine. So what they do is the container runtime engine compartmentalizes the processors and RAM and storage and dedicates it to a very tightly defined space in the kernel. So it's not a great idea to think of them as mini virtual machines. They're actually slices of the virtual machine itself. But by slicing it very tightly and using a container image definition file, the so-called Docker file, you've got a very well-defined bill of materials for your application. So you know exactly what's running in that container. And that in itself immediately brings you security benefits, because you reduced your attack surface. You're only running the essential components to run the application and not the full-blown operating system that you would normally associate with a virtual machine. So the first one is it does improve security. Not 100%. It's not 100% secure. You still have to secure the virtual machine itself. You can't treat the container as a sandbox. But you can certainly treat it as a very well-defined, discrete units of computing, which brings me to the second value of containers. They're portable, because if I develop an application on my desktop, I know I can deploy that to a data center down the road, or to AWS, or to Azure, and I know it will run there. because I've bundled up all the dependencies in that same container. So going back to the metaphor of a shipping container, you don't care what's inside the container because it's well defined and you can move it around easily. It becomes portable. And then I think the third advantage of containers is that they're very quick to start up because they only host the application and its dependencies. You don't have to start a whole virtual machine. And if you're doing a disaster recovery scenario, in the scenario you alluded to a minute ago, you don't have to go physically install the servers. You've got your virtual machines running. You just deploy your containers into that virtual environment or on a public cloud infrastructure. The one area that you do have to be careful about, though, is that your data storage becomes a bit of a challenge, because if you're moving these containers around very frequently, you have to persist the data somewhere in a database or in some sort of block storage device like S3 or Azure blobs or those sorts of technologies. But yeah, it does give you that independence. And I think for public sector people as well, is that you want to feel that you control your environment. So in the state IT agency's case, they've got the government private cloud. The same sort of deployment issues apply there. So it becomes transparent, to your data center staff where the thing is physically running. You just concentrate on the actual application.
Mm-hmm. If we look at public sector and private sector, what type of applications would we run in the container comfortably? Because listening to you're saying it is not 100% secured, but it is secured. So what type of applications would you run from the container?
Yeah. Just to clarify, what I meant was that the container is only as secure as the hosting virtual machine.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
If that is secured, then your container is secure.
So ideally, your container will be a service offered by the big companies that are offering also cloud services.
Chris Grobler, Microsoft 300.
Yes, that's correct. All the big hyperscalers offer a container platform if you want to use it. For example, AWS has two. There's the Elastic Container Service and the Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS. Azure has AKS, the Azure Kubernetes system. So that is definitely possible. In terms of the sorts of workloads that you would run, big legacy applications like a big SAP installation, that would be challenging to move because you've got this huge monolithic application, although they have started to modularize it. They're still very big, relatively monolithic, and those are hard to move. Where it really lends itself to is things like web application servers, HTTP servers, e-commerce sites. For example, if you're wanting to put up a site, a Shopify site or a WordPress site, containers are beautiful for that sort of application. Or if you want to back into a mobile device, you want to develop an app, that app must back end into a container, and containers are very, very useful there. The great thing on Mob is that you can scale them up. So, if people are hitting your app harder and harder, you just fire up an extra copy of the application stack. It's an exact clone of the container image. So it behaves the same, gives you the same functionality. And when when it quiets down again, then you can just purge the containers and just scale back down and reduce your operating costs because you're not running all this compute.
So on
a case-by-case basis.
The IT environment changes every day, and we need to keep up. What do you need to install to be able to use a container? How big an organization can move to a container environment? We've got lots of SMMEs, SMMEs, they don't have proper infrastructure. Why must they even develop and build that infrastructure, servers, or have on-premise data when there's, we're talking about containers now? What do you need? What do you need to install a container?
Okay, so if you are a startup, it makes very little sense to invest in your own data center because it's a hell of a cost. You have to secure it yourself. You've got to have your own disaster recovery. You've got to have your own security and your firewalls. It's much easier just to rent that service or just get those services, subscribe to them, and just do a pay-as-you-go model. Again, as I said earlier, it's scalable. So you can start small and then you can grow. In terms of running containers, you can run them anywhere on a desktop. The popular tool there is Docker. And it's interesting that the company named itself, took the metaphor of a shipping container to name the company itself Docker. So the metaphor is very apt. So I can fire up Docker on my laptop, or there's also an equivalent of Docker called Podman, which is from the Red Hat stable of products. So you can either use Docker or Podman on your laptop. And then when you're deploying to the cloud, you would then deploy it to a cluster that you would have fired up on the cloud. And again, it's very easy to fire up the cloud, a container cluster on the cloud. It really is as simple as clicking here and clicking there and just starting it up, and the engines start up, and then you just deploy your container into that space. So for startups, it's great. It really is. It's secure, it's scalable, it's cost effective, and it's predictable. You know what you're going to get.
Okay.
And
how pricey is that solution?
Well, it's infinitely scalable. It can cost you nothing at all if you start with the free tier, and then once you've exhausted that, it can be a few dollars a month. But then as you start scaling up, it starts to get more and more expensive. I mean, my cloud bill for my software development is probably about 1,000 Rand a month on AWS, which for a software development shop is not a lot of money. It's certainly much cheaper than buying all that hardware myself. So I would definitely recommend that SMMEs take this seriously, moving to a public cloud infrastructure.
Okay. So containers, can we comfortably conclude that containers run in the cloud?
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's a fantastic use case. What has driven the trend towards containerization is because of cloud. Previously it was just I could fire up a virtual machine on the cloud and you could just rent compute capacity from DigitalOcean or from Hetzner or whoever. But now that you still had to maintain your own virtual machines, you still had to install the operating system, you still had to patch the kernel. That's now all been abstracted away for you by the container cluster in the cloud. So I would definitely recommend that.
Gerald, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Rodney.
Hi, sorry about that. I just had a challenge. Gerald, I think maybe what you could probably share with the audience is just there are different types of applications. You get your custom applications, your COTS applications, your custom mainframe applications, and some of your desktop apps. The idea is, and I'm sure a lot of clients would like to know, can you take those in their format and migrate it to cloud in containers or non-containers, or do you need to modernize it for the cloud? Do you need to sort of put in some extensions for the hybrid cloud or something to that effect? Just maybe share some information, because I'm sure there are a lot of clients, a lot of companies that obviously has huge mainframes, huge desktops, huge applications, and they want to know, how can I actually containerize that? How can I actually move that? Is it ready to move, or do we need to do a cut and paste or a modernization or some sort of adjustment so that it can actually be ready for that?
Yeah. I think, Rodney, it has to be tackled on a case-by-case basis, and all the cloud service providers like AWS and Azure, they have got frameworks for helping you analyze your dependencies and say, what is the best match for your on-premise infrastructure to the cloud infrastructure. But to get the best value out of cloud, you really ought to go down a modernization route.
Of course.
I think the cost of lifting and shifting can be challenging. And if you are running a big legacy application on premise, you might look at the costs of moving it and weigh that up against the cost of leaving it where it is and say, well, that's not an appropriate workload. But certainly if you're looking at websites, if you're doing software development as I do, the cloud is fantastic because I can just bolt whatever I need to do. I don't have to install anything. If I need to send an email from an application, I just subscribe to an email service. If I want to send an SMS, I subscribe to that SMS service. So then I would put my application in its own little container on a cluster and have it interacting with the other services as software as a service subscriptions. Oh, we've lost Rodney again.
His connection is very interesting today. It never does this.
It's bad luck.
Listen, tell me, Gerald, maybe what do you want to do? So now, I don't know if you discussed or gone through some of those questions that Gerald has raised, or do you want to actually maybe just go for a break? I don't know if you had a break already, to maybe just go through some of those questions and then run through that. And then perhaps we could actually just share some of the different offerings of different containerization from Google, AWS, Microsoft, etc., just to be able to give some ideas, because those are some of the stuff that companies have in-house already.
We've gone through most of the questions, actually. We are on the last 3 right now. We can take
fantastic.
a break,
That's super then.
or you can take over from here, because you're supposed to run the co-host and run this thing. Now that you're back,
that's fine. That's right. You did a perfect job. You did an absolutely perfect job. You did a perfect job. So I think let's just continue with those. We can still maybe cover those 3 questions, the last 3 questions, because I don't know where you left off, but it's okay. I will just jump in there where I feel necessary. Continue, Sonabo.
I left off on do containers run in the cloud, which is what we've discussed. Gerald has responded. So the last 2 tell me more about Kubernetes. Okay? The history of Kubernetes and technologies built on top of it.
Yes, yeah. So Robert, this goes back to your earlier question about what do you need to run a container. If you're running it on your desktop, I mentioned the standard product is probably Docker, with Podman being a popular one for technical reasons. But when you're running at scale, the challenge is how do you keep track of all of these containers when they're popping up on demand and then they fold themselves away when they're not needed? You need an application which does an orchestration, which manages the swarm of containers. So if you think of a container as on a ship, you can think of Kubernetes as being the ship itself, with all the containers loaded onto that ship. In fact, the word Kubernetes, it comes from the Greek governor, to govern. You can think of this as a method of managing your herd of cattle. We use this expression, think cattle, not pets. You have to manage your containers en masse. And Kubernetes was developed by Google initially. They had a internal product they called the Borg, which if any science fiction fans are...
The Borg reminds me of Star Trek now. I'm a Trekkie.
Exactly. So they had their own tool called Borg. And from Borg, they then open sourced a lot of the technologies and developed Kubernetes. And then they opened it up to the world. And it's now become the de facto technology for managing containers. There were a couple of others like Docker Swarm. I think Google had another product. I forget its name now. But anyway, Kubernetes underpins most of these big container infrastructures. For example, Kubernetes underpins OpenShift from Red Hat. It underpins Anthos. And the one I like a lot is Rancher from SUSE, because Rancher allows you to manage containers across service providers. So I can have a cluster, some of which runs on-premise.
SUSE.
Yeah, but Rancher gives you a single pane of glass, and it makes if you're running a particular hybrid cloud situation, you can then manage that hybrid cloud through that one single dashboard, that one single interface. It doesn't care whether the container is running on AWS or Azure or on your desktop. It just knows where it is and it manages it for you. So yeah, Kubernetes is I mean, you can run it in its raw form, and I've done that. It can be a bit of a challenge from a technical perspective. People tend to rather use Rancher or OpenShift.
Okay. I think one of the questions that I think is very important. There's always been an issue, and I want to hear this from you.
Gerald, what I would like you to maybe do is
Rodney, we lost you.
Okay, let's shoot. How do you manage the deployments from a governance perspective?
There's various techniques. The one thing that's great about containers.
I can hear you, Gerald. Carry on.
Hi, Rodney. Yeah, I can hear you now. We're just talking about the deployment of containers and managing that, Rodney. The nice thing about the containers, I touched on it earlier in the discussion.
So, Nabo, you can finish your question. I was listening to your question.
I've asked the question.
Yeah, I was just saying that because you've got a standard software.
You said there was always an issue?
No, we'll finish off with that one.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that because you've got a standard bill of materials, which is well defined in your Docker file, and you deploy these your application using something like an Ansible script. I mustn't be too geeky about this, but yeah, you've got a standard scripts that you use to do the deployment, and because it's a standard way of deploying the application, which doesn't involve physically installing the software, you can then manage it from a policy perspective. So you can manage the security, you can manage which container can talk to which other container, but you can do it by enforcing policy rules.
Go for it.
So you don't need you don't need a network manager to do all that for you. You can actually describe in your deployment chart what the infrastructure needed to host the container should look like and all its interdependencies. Okay. So from a governance perspective, it's much easier to govern, actually. The governance challenges come when people start deploying in an unstructured, uncontrolled way. That can be difficult, and that can drive up your costs of hosting in the cloud if you don't keep a tight grip on that. And that's what my companies, we're specializing in this IT governance, because you want to look at reducing cost, you want to look at reducing your operating cost, your risk exposure, your attack surface. You're trying to minimize all of that so that risk managers can understand what they're up against.
So basically, policies before you embark on this road are very critical.
Absolutely. And then you can align them with the policies of your strategic objectives. You can use sophisticated policies which make sure that certain deployments are aligned with what you're trying to achieve from a business value perspective. For example, if you've got an architecture decision that you'll only use a certain particular means of communicating with your clients, then you can define that in your container policy deployment strategy, that those containers will use that mechanism to communicate with.
Now let's talk Gerald. are these the type of services that you are offering? Is this
Yes,
your
yeah.
space in your organization? This is what you're offering. This is what you assist with people to do. And let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I mean, what we do is we use a technology called GitLab to develop software. GitLab, you can subscribe to the service GitLab, but you can also run it on premise as well. So if you've got your own private cloud, for example, you can host GitLab. And what GitLab does is it automates the whole software development lifecycle for you. So that when a developer's finished a small piece of development, he or she can then just click commit. It pushes that change into your software development pipeline, and then it fires off a whole chain of containers which do the build, they do the QA testing, they do the user acceptance testing, and then they deploy into your production environment seamlessly. And that's a huge advantage over the old way of working where you deployed in development, and then there's a whole mission to lift and shift it into the QA environment and then into production. And it was always rickety and prone to errors. But if you're going to go for pure agile software development, you want to be able to deploy continuously. And containers allow you to do that because you're shipping these containers all the time. You might be changing the goods inside the container, but you do it in a controlled way, and you ship that container, and then it moves across your infrastructure through the QA environment into production. So that's what we are specializing in, this whole agile software development using containers and container pipelines.
So your services is purely consultative. You consult, you advise, you structure this thing, you design, you give the person a full solution, and the actual hosting container environment is with the big organizations that does your cloud hosting. Gerald?
What we do is we both do software development ourselves, and we do our own software development, and we are also able to advise clients on these sorts of best practices.
Okay.
So I'm currently working on a modernization project for one of the banks, and that's the first thing we're going to tackle to see, what can we get off, what would lend itself to being kept on premise, and what would lend itself to be served by a cloud hosted solution.
Okay. And are you national? Are you in Johannesburg? You are in 5 provinces, 4 provinces, 9 of them.
These days, it doesn't make much difference. Hey? We've all been working from one office for the last 2 years. That's the one in our homes. So I'm global.
You're global. See, I'm happy to hear you are global. So you can connect from anywhere, offer any service from anywhere. Look, I
think we've
had
lost
to ask
Gerald
the
there for a
questions
minute. He's just frozen onto his screen.
No, I'm here.
I just needed to ask that question just for clarity for people that are going to watch this thing even after, to understand that
Yes.
we've gone total off the brick and mortar, and you can work from anywhere.
Absolutely. And even in Octon, we actually offer e-commerce solutions as well, and that could be anywhere. We rendering services in Delaware.
Gee, okay.
So, but that's the point, because it's all seamless. It doesn't matter where you work from.
Rod, are you back online? He's not. So if people wanted to contact you while we trying to establish if Rod can connect, if people want to, we have to get hold of you. Where do they get hold of you?
Thanks, Sanwaba. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can also go to the website octon.io. It's ARCH, as in
Sorry,
architect.
Gerald, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear you, Rodney? I could, not any longer. Yeah, there's a contact form on the website, Sonwaba. Then listeners I would be happy to answer any questions posed through the contact sheet.
Okay, can you guys hear me? I'd like to just ask a question.
Ask a question, Rod. You cutting. You got a delayed connection.
So, Nabo, yeah.
I've lost them altogether.
So they can go into your website. You've got a contact page. They can complete the page, then get hold of you.
Yes, yeah. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot as well, so you can get me through there. We're a SUSE Linux partner and a GitLab partner as well. So we can also, we know who to partner with to get the solutions out.
I think you need to reread the thing for the people to know. What is your, is www dot
Octon, ARCH, as in architect, and
okay.
then TON, as in tecton. So it's Octon, architecture meets technology.
.co.za.
No, well, there is it's .io because we're international.
Octon.io.
That's correct.
I think let's put it there.
That's it. Thank you.
So people can get hold of you on that website. That's your home, and people basically can follow you on LinkedIn.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is Gerald O'Sullivan.
That's correct.
It's fine. Look, for me, it was eye-opening. I am not really an infrastructure person when it comes to things like your cloud, because I call it infrastructure because it comes from your hard assets, which used to be servers and storage and all those things.
Yes, exactly.
Now it's just infrastructure moved to bigger areas, bigger premises, and consolidated and running from there. I've learned a lot from this thing. Now I know there's containers that exist. I know that it's cheaper for SMMEs to embark on this road rather than building the infrastructure and having the server administrators and all related resources in-house to manage and secure their data. So I hope everyone who's going to watch this and anyone that was listening, there's a person who said she loves this. So hopefully we've made a difference. Our job is to disseminate information. I hope Rodney told you. We try to disseminate information as much as possible. And in the process of disseminating information, if we can make a difference to organizations like yours and just give them a platform for people to listen and know that you are out there and they can use you, then we've done our job.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Sonwaba. I think the whole area of containers is a trend which is going to continue. I think the cloud is a reality. The DPSA has just published the Public Sector Cloud Directive. So this is the way of the future. And the fact that it supports SMMEs is very exciting as well, because now it eases the friction of doing business, because you can easily deploy, creative applications on hosting infrastructure that you can scale up or scale down.
I'm going to ask you a question on domain services, domain network services, DNS. More and more in South Africa, organizations like Zetna, they want SMMEs to play in that space, but the infrastructure, the setup infrastructure for people to be resellers and hosting entities when they resell domains, it's prohibiting. Do you think the container is an ideal environment for such services or not?
Not necessarily. There's some components would be, for example, that your management tools could easily run in a container, but the actual DNS service itself, I mean, that has to be very close to the metal. It's got to be very robust. So I would hesitate to containerize that.
Okay, so if I hear you right, it might be, there might be a need for a combination.
Yeah, you would need very high speed links in and out of your data center as well. So, I mean, you'd be looking at hosting in something, for example, at Terraco or at Dubai Tradeport, for example, you know, you'd need that kind of connectivity to be a domain registrar or a secondary DNS service provider. So, yeah, I would go in that terrain very cautiously.
Okay. No. At least now I know there's an answer. I've always thought that they can plug it into a cloud environment and it works any environment. So Terraco gives an idea. So I understand. So I hope people who want to go that route, it is going to be a cautious route to take, as you're suggesting.
Yeah. But I'm more of a software developer than a networking guy. So other listeners might have, you know, better experience and better tales of battles that have been won and lost in the trenches than myself. So I think there's the topic for your next conversation.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, because future is software, we predominantly focus on the software. We'll have to look into the infrastructure space. Yeah, but it's an interesting path because they are pushing that this must happen. People must play in that space, but I don't think the cost of doing it is worth the effort.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it would scale. You know, I mean, there's a limited number of domain names you can support. You know, so. But yeah, as I say, networking guys must weigh in.
Must come and sit here and answer that question.
Yeah, and share their wisdom.
No, from my side, I think if you've got a parting shot, please give us. Thank you very much. Highly appreciate. It's always good connecting with you.
Yes, yeah, no, it's been a pleasure chatting. I'm sorry that Rodney had to drop in and drop out. I was looking forward to some of his robust questions. But it's great chatting to you, Sonwabo, and hopefully we'll see each other again at another hackathon.
We will. We're trying to organize one, but it's getting very tricky getting sponsorships in this space, in the hackathon space. So we're trying to get partners to do it with.
Great. Well, let's talk.
We'll talk. I'll take that call. I'll call you. Let's talk.
Great stuff.
Keep well. Always nice meeting you.
Yep. Thanks, Sonwabo. And thanks to the listeners. I hope everyone found it informative. Yeah, and don't hesitate to drop me a line if you've got further questions, and I'll get back to you.
Yes, please contact Gerald on www.archton.io. We did not make a mistake. It is IO because it's international. Thank you. Keep well. Great. Stay blessed.
Thanks so much.
Thank you everyone who's taken the time off to come and listen. in the next coming 10 minutes, we will be moving to another conversation on renewable energy sources. Thank you, Gerald. Keep well.
Great. Thanks all. Cheers now.